talking in there, and then it seemed like the whole world ended.
Counting the casualties in Oklahoma City. Good morning from CBS News in New York. This is Up to the Minute. I'm Nanette Hansen.
And I'm Ed Crane. Here's what's happening on this Thursday morning: the search for survivors and the hunt for answers in America's heartland.
Just after the start of the workday in Oklahoma City yesterday, a bomb blast gouged a 9-story hole in a downtown federal office building. At this point, there's no claim of responsibility for the attack that officials are calling the worst act of terrorism in this nation's history. At least 31 people are now confirmed dead, with more than 200 people injured. But those numbers are sure to rise. Some 200 people are missing, many of them presumed trapped in the rubble. Now, we'll get more on this story from CBS News correspondent Dave Failing, who's on the scene in Oklahoma City. Dave, what can you tell us?
Well, the shock and disbelief over all of this here in Oklahoma City is now turning to anger as people realize just what sort of carnage was caused by this bomb. The official death toll now at 31, including 12 children, though they expect that to go much higher. They know that one woman, though, was rescued late last evening, which gave hope to some of the rescue workers here. She was rescued in the basement and successfully was taken out and is doing supposedly okay in a hospital. Still, though, there are some 300 people unaccounted for. That is about half the number of people who reported here to work yesterday morning. The explosion in Oklahoma City shows that no place in America is safe from terrorist-like violence. The front of the Alfred Murrah Building was simply blown away by the force of the blast, which was felt 55 miles away.
It's too close to home.
Seemed like the whole world ended.
You see this kind of stuff on TV, not in your backyard.
The blast happened just as many of the workers in the federal building were starting their day.
There was a boom and the building shook and the ceiling fell in and the walls fell in and there was nothing left. The whole floors crashed in.
Firefighters are combing the building for survivors and victims. The rescue effort was complicated by rumors of a second bomb in the building, forcing an evacuation of the area.
They've got a hot device. Get them back!
The youngest victims of the violence were children. They were in a second-floor daycare center when the blast happened.
We have hundreds of potential suspects. A number of coincidences that have occurred. However, to say that it's one particular group or one individual, we're not anywhere near making any statement with regard to that.
Hundreds of people across Oklahoma City lined up to give blood to replenish what has been used to treat the injured. Federal authorities believe up to 1,200 pounds of explosives were used in the blast.
We do have a crater that exists outside the federal building, which is about 20 feet in diameter, which of course has all the earmarkings of a car bomb, but until we have our experts in here to examine the crime scene, we are not going to make such a conclusion.
Now, federal authorities have not said definitively if they have linked this to any particular group, but there have been consistent reports that police were seeking 3 men, possibly with Middle Eastern connections, who may have stayed in a motel here in Oklahoma City last evening, and who may have also rented a car in Dallas. And there are reports that police have been alerted in neighboring states to be looking for a particular make and model car, but we know nothing more at this time. That's the latest here from Oklahoma City. I'm Dave Failing, CBS News. Back to you.
Dave, what will be happening there in Oklahoma City at the scene throughout the course of the morning?
Well, Nanette, they have lighted this area with some extraordinarily bright lights, the same ones they tell us are used on aircraft carriers. So they intend to try to work all through the evening, all through the night, into the morning. The one thing that's happened that's a positive note is that some very severe thunderstorms that passed through here late in the evening have now dissipated, and they're expecting sunny weather tomorrow, which is good news because it had turned cold and had some rather nasty weather here for a while.
All right, Dave Failing reporting to us this morning from Oklahoma City. Thank you.
And the White House has reacted quickly to the bombing. President Clinton announcing a massive federal effort is underway to find those responsible.
It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil. The United States will not tolerate it, and I will not allow the people of this country to be intimidated by evil cowards. Let there be no room for doubt. We will find the people who did this. When we do, justice will be swift, certain, and severe.
Without discussing the details, the president said he was taking every precaution to reassure and protect people who work in and live near other federal facilities.
It is just heart-wrenching to see the babies and small children pulled from the scene. We're going to take a short break and be back with more news. Stay with us.
This is CBS News, up to the minute.
There was a boom and the building shook and the ceiling fell in and the walls fell in and there was nothing left.
For Oklahoma City and the country, this deadly terrorist attack will have a lasting impact. Another tragic dent in our nation's sense of invincibility. And as CBS News correspondent Peter Van Sant reports, the images of this devastation will not fade quickly.
What the heck happened?
Amid the horror of the bombing, it's the dead and wounded children.
Yeah, just sit right here.
We gotta find this brother.
The cruelest casualties that have stunned and angered the nation.
It's more than just emotional down here. People are devastated by what they're seeing.
Very disturbing video of children who were hurt down on the scene.
On the streets, medics and volunteers desperately tried to save the broken children.
There's heavy damage downtown to office buildings. As emergency crews try to assist the injured, we have no report yet on the number of injured people, just that there are numerous injuries.
The car bomb was detonated just as the more than 500 government employees were settling into their desks.
I thought it was an earthquake because I resided in California for many years and it was almost like slow motion. I felt a shake and then it began shaking more. And I dove under my desk, and then the glass all came in. I think that helped save me. All the glass was gone. It's all over the office.
Here's another person being taken to ambulances. Obviously, a major tragedy here in downtown Oklahoma City.
Authorities believe the bomb may have been delivered in this vehicle and weighed more than 1,000 pounds.
It's obviously a very high explosive. Ammonium nitrate could be a possible source. Again, until we get the experts in there, we start taking actual samples and do a thorough analysis. There's no way for us to conclude what it is.
Its force blew away an entire side of the building. It was obviously the work of terrorists, but which group or individuals?
We've had numerous calls from various organizations, from individuals to organizations, to say we've had anyone that we think is the actual entity responsible. We cannot make that conclusion yet. We've had hundreds of calls around the country.
Rumors created panic.
They've got a hot device. Get them back!
These people are fleeing after being told that a second bomb was found in the building. Luckily, the report was untrue.
We never did find another device. We temporarily had to call off the search. After we confirmed no other device existed, then we resumed the search.
Amid the rubble laid the dead and wounded. There are reports that at least 250 people are missing. Others have found a pocket of life in the debris, awaiting rescue.
We've got people we're talking to through floors. This is very much like what happened at the California earthquake, where we've got pancake structures, floors down on top of other floors. We've got the potential, according to our building surveys, of having 900 people in that building during a workday. How many are out, we don't know.
This man, Brian Espy, was dramatically saved from his agriculture department office. Espy believes he's the only one from his office to get out alive.
My entire staff of about 7 people is gone.
Just he and I and one lady are the only ones that walk out of our floor area.
The people of Oklahoma are channeling their sorrow and outrage into helping the victims.
We intend to honor the dead and honor the living by finding out who did this and never permitting this conduct to recur.
This is not Chechnya or Sarajevo or Beirut. It's Oklahoma. Terrorism laid at America's heartland. If this cowardly bomb was designed to send a message that no one, no place is safe, it sadly succeeded.
The car bomb that exploded in America's heartland has the dubious distinction of being the deadliest U.S. bombing in 75 years. Rescue efforts are continuing, but the casualty count is expected to rise. The dead are now being numbered at 31, including at least a dozen children. The injured are topping 200, with several dozen of them said to be critical. And the number causing a great deal of concern are the missing, now numbered at 200.
Federal law enforcement agencies in Washington knew early on that the explosion in Oklahoma City was no accident. One of their top bomb experts was just 2 blocks from the federal building at the time of the incident, and he quickly alerted folks in Washington that this had all the signs of a car bombing. Now, as CBS News correspondent Jim Stewart reports, federal officials are promising swift action.
We cannot tell how long it will be before we can say with certainty what occurred and who is responsible. But we will find the perpetrators and we will bring them to justice.
The FBI, which will head the investigation, is pouring manpower into the case and has alerted field offices to forward suspicious mail to headquarters for a fingerprint comparison with those of suspected terrorists.
The very first project will be to get those bomb fragments and decide who set the bomb, who made the bomb. And the FBI and the ATF have the expertise to do that.
But don't look for any fast answers, the experts warn. Shifting through the rubble alone and analyzing it at FBI labs may take weeks, and defending against future terrorist attacks may be even more difficult.
Well, you can't lock our society down. You can't prevent every opportunity of an individual who wants to assassinate someone or who wants to place a bomb, but you need to take prudent precautions.
First intelligence reports in this case suggested a revenge attack by the Branch Davidians, many of whose members were killed in a raid by federal agents 2 years ago today in Waco, Texas. Now the betting here, however, is on Middle Eastern terrorists with a far bigger agenda. Jim Stewart, CBS News, Washington.
The most recent training ground for this form of urban terrorism has been New York City and the World Trade Center bombing. James Fox is the former head of the FBI in New York. He now heads his own private security firm, and he is also a CBS News consultant. Mr. Fox, this looks a little bit familiar to you, I'm sure.
There are certain familiarities here, yes. One, of course, being the means of delivery, a van or a truck, used both in Oklahoma City and at the World Trade Center. Another being the enormity of the blast, the size of the bomb, probably 1,000 to 1,200 pounds in Oklahoma City, and we estimated 1,200 pounds at the World Trade Center bombing. One very important difference, the World Trade Center, the bomb was in the basement of the building. Thousands of tons of rubble came down on the key evidence crater. Here, the bomb was set off outside the federal building. There's an 8-foot crater, but once they get the go-ahead to start doing a crime scene search in that area, it should be fairly easy to clear the crater, sift it, go through it for every single piece of dirt, rubble, looking for evidence maybe as small as a computer chip, maybe as big as a piece of a frame from a truck, hopefully with a vehicle identification number on it.
Now, it's still very early, but does this have the earmarks of a suicide bombing?
We can't tell at all because apparently the vehicle itself was totally destroyed. I don't see why it would have to be a suicide bombing. The person could just pull up to the closest wall of the federal building that he could park and walk away from the bomb. There would be no need to make it a suicide bombing.
Oklahoma City is known to have a fairly large Middle Eastern community. Do you see a connection?
I wouldn't make that jump yet, and I know some people are pointing fingers at Muslim extremists, and I'm not ready to do that. I don't think it's appropriate, but it does have a large Arabic population and a large Muslim population.
Oklahoma City is also perhaps symbolic for terrorists because it is the heartland of America. It is the middle. They are sending a message perhaps that we can do this anywhere.
That may be the message they're trying to send, and when people ask why Oklahoma City, nobody knows at this point, but maybe they're trying to say, Americans, it's not only New York and Washington where we are going to strike, it's going to be places like Omaha, Springfield, Minneapolis, trying to perhaps promote fear throughout the country.
At the time of the World Trade Center bombing a couple of years ago, your people also uncovered potential acts of terrorism at other installations in New York City. The George Washington Bridge comes to mind. Might we be seeing other targets with this group?
Frankly, we don't know much about whatever group's involved. There certainly could be other targets. We found that some of these people are buoyed and inspired by success, and this is certainly a world-class terrorist act in Oklahoma City. I was a little bit surprised by the timing of it. I did not think that a group would try and make, certainly not a Muslim group, would try and make a statement while the trial was still going on here in New York City.
From what you know, from working in the FBI, would there be any other group outside of the Middle East, an IRA type, that could be possibly?
There are groups all over the world. The United States is the greatest melting pot in the world, and that means we have individuals of national and ethnic origin, some of whom bring their hard feelings and grudges to the United States that they carried in the old country. I always say you can't rule out the drug cartels. Some of these drug cartels have been enormously damaged by recent activities by the U.S. government, and if they wanted to make a statement, a massive bomb would certainly be a way to make a statement.
What about the investigation? Janet Reno, the Attorney General, has dispatched some experts. They should be on the ground running within hours now. Pinpoint exactly what will be done.
I think the FBI crime scene search team is already there, extensively trained on just how to filter every possible piece of evidence at a crime scene. Agents are arriving hourly. I'm sure there are hundreds there now. More will be arriving tomorrow. Tonight, however, this is primarily a rescue operation. It still is, because there are so many people still unaccounted for. As soon as the investigators can get access to the area they need, they will begin their sifting, and they will break up into teams, and there will literally be teams handing every phase of this investigation, coordinate it to a central point. And I have some confidence that in this case that there might also be an early solution.
One of the scariest things about this is that these bombs are fairly easy to produce.
They are. This bomb, stating it as simply as you can, and the one at the World Trade Center, certainly the World Trade Center, probably this bomb, the components were primarily fertilizer and fuel oil with an accelerant to get the explosion going and a detonator. But where could you find fertilizer and fuel oil if not Oklahoma?
Absolutely. James Fox, former head of the FBI in New York and a CBS News consultant. We'll have more news after this.
Town office building about 5 blocks away. The explosion went off around 9 a.m. and we...
Now it's time to take a look at the up-to-the-minute weather map. A storm will bring showers and mountain snow to the northern Rockies. A large storm in the plains will trigger thunderstorms across the south and rain in the upper Midwest. A few snowflakes will fall in the central plains. New England will dry out tomorrow. Some cold air will dominate the northern plains, Rockies, and parts of the Northwest. In contrast, warm weather will continue across the south with highs in the 70s and 80s.
In a possible first-round NBA playoff preview, the mailman delivered in a big way for Utah. Karl Malone was not going to be stopped by the Houston Rockets in Salt Lake City. The Rockets and Jazz were tied at the half, but Houston lost forward Robert Horry after his elbow caught Malone's face in the third quarter. Houston's composure took another hit after John Stockton's three-pointer and a foul caused Rocket coach Rudy Tomjanovich to lose his temper. He, too, was ejected. The Jazz led by 13 at this point. Malone helped the Jazz pull away with a season-high 45-point performance. He also had 17 rebounds. Utah trails San Antonio by a game and a half in the Midwest. And if you're actor Robert Urich, this might be cause to dance with the Bears. On to Denver, where they're hungry, very hungry, for that last playoff berth in the West. The Nuggets moved a game and a half ahead of idle Sacramento in the race for that playoff spot. Rodney Rogers did some slam dancing and finished with 15 against Minnesota. The Nuggets also got 14 from Brian Williams. But these two didn't count. Denver liked dancing with T-Wolves. The Nuggets win big, 106-81. Boston had a chance to wrap up the final playoff berth in the East at Milwaukee, but Eric Mobley had other ideas. So did Glenn Robinson. After a Dominique Wilkins miss, the big dog beat everyone else down the floor on the way to a pair of his 26 points. Leading the Young Bucks again was Vin Baker. He had 27 and 10 rebounds as Milwaukee moved within 2 games of the Celtics with 2 to play after a 106-97 win.
The attack in Oklahoma City sent a shockwave of emotion across America. There was a ripple of fear, a smattering of sympathy, and anger was the undercurrent. All those emotions were evident in the president's address yesterday afternoon.
Wow. Holy cow. About a third of the building has been blown away.
The bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on innocent children and defenseless citizens. It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil. The United States will not tolerate it, and I will not allow the people of this country to be intimidated by evil cowards. I have met with our team, which we assembled to deal with this bombing. And I have determined to take the following steps to assure the strongest response to this situation. First, I have deployed a crisis management team under the leadership of the FBI. We are sending the world's finest investigators to solve these murders. Second, I have declared an emergency in Oklahoma City. And at my direction, James Lee Witt, the director of the Federal Emergency Management Agency, is now on his way there to make sure we do everything we can to help the people of Oklahoma deal with the tragedy. Third, we are taking every precaution to reassure and to protect people who work in or live near other federal facilities. Let there be no room for doubt. We will find the people who did this. When we do, justice will be swift, certain, and severe. These people are killers, and they must be treated like killers. Finally, let me say that I ask all Americans tonight to pray for the people who have lost their lives, to pray for the families and the friends of the dead and the wounded, to pray for the people of Oklahoma City. May God's grace be with them. Meanwhile, we will be about our work. Thank you.
And that's the news for this half hour.
This is CBS News Up to the Minute.
This is CBS.
There's still some areas we haven't been able to get to because of the debris. That's going to be our focus tonight.
Now on CBS News Up to the Minute, the search by searchlight through the night in Oklahoma City.
Good morning from CBS News in New York. This is Up to the Minute. I'm Ed Crane.
Good morning. I'm Nanette Hansen. Thanks for being with us. Rescue crews in Oklahoma City this morning are still combing through the rubble, searching for survivors of a deadly terror attack aimed at the heart of America. A car bomb ripped open a federal office building yesterday with hundreds of people inside. The attack came without warning, and a U.S. government source tells CBS News it has Middle East terrorism written all over it. So far, at least 31 people, including several children, are confirmed dead, 200 others injured, and some 200 people are still unaccounted for, many of them still believed to be trapped under the debris. CBS News correspondent Scott Pelley is on the scene.
The blast was catastrophic. Half of the 9-story federal building collapsed into the street, an estimated 900 people inside.
It was a big force. This all fell in. Everyone along our set of offices had back injuries, head injuries, neck, bleeding, glass. Stretcher, she's got a seizure.
And the building shook and the ceiling fell in and the walls fell in and there was nothing left.
It was minutes after 9 a.m. Children had just arrived at the daycare center on the second floor. At least 17 children were killed. 20 others are missing. Hundreds of other victims are trapped, missing, wounded, or dead. Police say it was a car bomb, perhaps as big as 1,000 pounds. And in the middle of the mayhem, they feared there was a second explosive.
They've got a hot device. Get them back!
The evacuation delayed the rescue for a critical hour. No second bomb was found. Rescuers returned to find themselves in the aftermath of what is likely the largest peacetime act of terrorism ever on United States soil.
We've got areas where we can actually look through and see people trapped, but we can't get to them right now. Some of them are crying and screaming, and we've been in there and done our best to reassure them. We've been able to get down through cracks and hold their hands. We'll be here for days doing this. You know, this rescue effort is probably going to take about 3 or 4 days at least.
One of the luckiest this day was Brian Espy, an Agriculture Department official sitting in his office.
My entire staff of around 7 people is gone. If somebody did this, what could be their motive? To hurt that many innocent people?
The building housed offices that included those of the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the Internal Revenue Service, Social Security, and the Secret Service. The governor of Oklahoma says 2 things are known for sure. Those who did this knew what they were doing, and whoever did it, the governor said, is some kind of animal. Scott Pelley, CBS News.
A massive federal manhunt is underway to catch those behind yesterday's deadly bomb attack. President Clinton has declared a state of emergency in Oklahoma City, speeding up federal relief and deployment of law enforcement teams. Mr. Clinton also ordered tightened security at all federal buildings around the U.S. CBS News correspondent Regina Blakely has more on that.
President Clinton called those responsible for the Oklahoma City bombing killers.
The bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on innocent children and defenseless citizens. It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil.
While refusing to answer any questions about evidence that would link anyone to the crime, like where the bomb was located, was there any warning, and could it have been linked to the Branch Davidian disaster, the president and Attorney General Janet Reno said justice would be swift and deadly.
Let there be no room for doubt. We will find the people who did this. When we do, justice will be swift, certain, and severe.
18 U.S.C. Section 844 relates to those who maliciously damage or destroy a federal building. If there is death, if death occurs, the death penalty is available, and we will seek it.
A 24-hour command post staffed with explosive experts from the FBI and the Secret Service has been established in Oklahoma City. The Federal Emergency Management Agency has instituted emergency relief.
We need everybody out of the building.
As word of the bombing spread, other federal buildings around the country, like those in Portland and in Boston, were evacuated, either because of reported threats or nerves. The White House ordered additional security measures be put in place. And just as with the World Trade Center bombing 2 years ago, the threat that anywhere in America could be a terrorist target left people across the country uneasy and insecure.
I believe it might be a message that the middle of the United States is not inured from terrorism. It may be a wake-up call that we too are going to be subject to acts of terrorism.
And it is because of that reality that federal officials say they will work together to try to figure out who is responsible for this and why. Regina Blakely, CBS News at the White House.
Authorities in Japan now say more than 300 people got sick in what may have been a copycat gas attack in one of Japan's busiest train stations. A mystery gas yesterday filled the main train station in the port city of Yokohama. Police believe it was a deliberate attack, and nerves are on edge once again across Japan. CBS News correspondent James Hattori reports from Tokyo.
It's a nightmarish replay the Japanese were dreading. Another gas attack, this time at the Yokohama train station east of Tokyo. More than 300 people sickened by noxious fumes. My nose was stinging and my throat became sore, this woman says. I heard people say sarin, sarin, he says. But this time it was not sarin, the deadly nerve gas which killed 12 people in last month's Tokyo subway attack. Officials suspect it was phosgene, a deadly World War I-era chemical weapon that attacks the lungs. If it was phosgene, it was likely very diluted. Still, experts say there should be some telltale residue.
Police should find some chemicals.
Where it came from?
Yeah.
Witnesses report seeing a suspicious fluid on the station floor. This woman remembers seeing a suspicious man. I smelled something as soon as he passed by, she says. He had something in his left hand. Investigators have collected evidence, including a number of small cardboard boxes and vinyl bags. But so far, no suspects.
Now, it could be a copycat who was really trying to do some damage,
There's even the remote possibility that what we're looking at here is some sort of a prank gone bad.
There was a quick denial of involvement by Aum Shinrikyo, the religious group suspected in last month's Tokyo attack. In that investigation, despite circumstantial evidence, police have yet to formally link Aum members with the subway deaths. But investigators are turning up the heat Wednesday night, taking yet another top Aum Shinrikyo leader into custody right after he appeared on a live TV program. James Hattori, CBS News, Tokyo.
We'll be back after a break.
Stay with us. This is CBS News Up to the Minute.
The bombing in Oklahoma City was an attack on innocent children and defenseless citizens. It was an act of cowardice, and it was evil.
Yesterday's attack was similar to the World Trade Center bombing in 1993 and attacks on U.S. forces in Lebanon in the 1980s. That has investigators looking for possible links to Middle Eastern groups in the American Midwest. CBS News correspondent Anthony Mason has that part of the story.
The scene is a convention of Muslims in 1992 sponsored by the Islamic Association for Palestine. The place is not the Middle East, it is Oklahoma City. While the overwhelming majority of Muslims in America and at this convention are not radicals, this meeting in Oklahoma City was attended by members of Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Muslim Brotherhood, groups whose charters portray America as evil.
Oklahoma City, I can tell you, is probably considered one of the largest centers of Islamic radical activity outside the Middle East.
Steve Emerson chronicled the rise of radical Islam in America in a PBS documentary and showed how fundamentalists had launched a recruiting campaign across the Southwest, where it's been easier to escape public scrutiny.
Our problems are solved in the trenches, fighting, not in the hotels.
For Emerson, the attack in Oklahoma City appears to have a familiar mark.
This was done with the attempt to inflict as many casualties as possible. That is a Middle Eastern trait and something that has been generally not carried out in this soil until we were rudely awakened to it in 1993.
A truck bomb, a massive explosion. It happened at the World Trade Center. It happened in Buenos Aires last year, a car bomb exploding outside the Jewish Community Center.
Federal officials immediately saw the similarities too, and sources tell CBS News that unofficially, the FBI is treating this as a Middle Eastern-related incident. Anthony Mason, CBS News, New York.
The question of controlling the export of terrorism from the Middle East has yet to be answered, but two men with expertise on both sides of the issue from both sides of the world join us this morning. Author Steve Emerson contributed to the Anthony Mason piece we just saw. He was the executive producer of a public television special called Jihad in America. He's currently working on a new documentary series and a book about radical Islamic fundamentalist groups in America. He is also a CBS News consultant. Fouad Ajami is an expert on the Middle East at Johns Hopkins University, and he is also a CBS News consultant. Steve, my first question is for you. It appears that terrorism has been exported to the United States. Now, how do we deal with it?
Well, actually, I don't think the right word is export anymore. This is homegrown terrorism. No longer can we make the separation between international terrorism and domestic terrorism. These groups, if in fact this is a case of Islamic militant extremists, are headquartered and based throughout the United States. And that's a problem that we almost came to terms with from the World Trade Center bombing, but it probably didn't cause enough casualties. Now I think the pain and blood is going to cause people to realize what the magnitude of the problem is.
You can almost appreciate something happening in New York. It is such a world center for everything. But Oklahoma City, people say to themselves, my goodness, this is Middle America.
Well, in fact, one of the most interesting discoveries that I happened upon when I was doing the research for Jihad in America was that many of these groups have headquarters and or hosted conventions featuring the most militant Islamic leaders in the world in places such as Tucson, Phoenix, Kansas City, Chicago, and Oklahoma City, which, by the way, hosted at least 3 major conventions of radical Islamic extremists over the past dozen years. It's because it's out of the way of the East Coast, out of the way of journalists. They can hide in, blend in, and avoid any of the scrutiny that would normally attend if they were in the East Coast.
Fuad Ajami, is there a terror network in the United States?
Well, you know, a whole new generation of young Arabs and young Muslims have emerged out of the hothouse of the Middle East in the 1980s. They believe that they have scapegoated America for a long time. They grew up and emerged in a political culture that told them that America was the great Satan. The shadow of American power lies over the region. We are a party to the conflicts of the Middle East, so the wars of the Middle East eventually have to come here. Now, we don't know, and you rightly said so at the lead-in, that we still don't know about Oklahoma City, but we do know about the classic case being the World Trade Center. And what we saw in the World Trade Center was here was one drifter, a young man named Mohammed Salama, who was a misfit. He went everywhere. He looked he was seeking his own calling. And then there was another boy who had gone to Rutgers and got a good American education. And these were, again, some of the characters. And there was a blind sheikh who got on a flight from Cairo to Khartoum in the Sudan and ended up in Jersey City and Brooklyn. So, you know, the Atlantic has been shrunk. And the terror which the Middle East saw and the terror which Europe experienced in the 80s has become an American phenomenon.
And we should caution that this is all very early. We don't know exactly who's responsible. It has all the earmarks of a Middle Eastern-style car bombing, but we don't know. We
have to wait for a decent interval to say, okay, here's who did this. And actually, I don't think even then we will know fully, because I don't know what Steve thinks. We have never gotten to the bottom of the World Trade Center affair. We know about Salama, we know about Nidal Ayad, we know about two or three people, but we don't know where the trail ends. I mean, it's hard with these things. They're bottomless in many ways.
Fuad is exactly right that it is bottomless, and that's the problem, and that it's an amorphous threat. The groups exist now in many countries, perhaps 50 countries. They move in and out of countries with great ease. They can float in and out with money. They've got weapons, expertise. This type of explosion is not a high-tech explosion. It's simply ammonium nitrate if it turns out to be a replication of the World Trade Center bombing and regular fuel oil. This is not something that requires a high level of planning. It's something that can be done by almost anybody. That's the problem.
If it was a Middle Eastern group, what's the rationale behind Oklahoma City? What's the rationale behind mid-April 1995?
I think if we look too much toward those type of questions as to specific causes, we're looking at the wrong problem. There isn't any specific event needed for them to be mobilized into carrying out such an attack. It's the mere existence of the United States, its support for Israel and Egypt, its system of democracy, of capitalism, of separation of church and state. Those are ongoing reasons that don't require any impulse for someone to carry out an attack. And therefore, what triggers an attack like this is simply a target of opportunity.
Would you think that there might be more of these type strikes ahead?
Well, I think so. I mean, look, who would have thunk it in 1993 after the World Trade Center and say, okay, does this end the trail? Is this the end of it? It wasn't the end of it. Is New York the sole target? No. Again, I think Steve Emerson has it absolutely right. Why Oklahoma City? The answer is why not? Why not? It had to be the target of opportunity would present itself. And let's face it, in many ways, for large numbers of people in the world, the American example is a troubling example. The power of America, the example of America. America teases these populations, and our doors are open. Immigration is easy. It's a liberal society. Its liberties could be used and abused by anyone at will. And we are in the middle of a great question. I mean, it has to do with how one can cope with a society like ours, which has this great strengths and great vulnerabilities.
And once we meaning the United States, gets to the bottom of who did it, we have to find out who's behind it. Any thoughts? We
may never find out who's really behind it, or we may find out that it's are people that have an address in Dallas or Brooklyn. What are we going to bomb Dallas or Brooklyn? The fact is, this is a problem, a phenomenon that has developed over the last dozen years. We didn't really recognize it until 2 years ago. Now we have recognized it, at least in terms of their ability to carry out terrorist attacks, but it doesn't mean we're able to confront it. The FBI itself is so limited in its ability to track these groups. There's a language problem, there's a manpower problem, and there's also a great legislative statutory problem. Many of these groups define themselves as, quote, religious, and they are immune from types of surveillance that normally would be applied to criminal organized crime.
Well, when I say behind it, I'm talking about state-sponsored terrorism.
See, I think states are not really, the issue of states was really the issue of the 80s. And even then, if you want to, like take, for example, the classic case of retribution against a state. Reagan ordered the bombing of Libya because of a West Berlin discotheque episode. Even then, the jury was out on that. It could have been Syria that did it. It could have been Iran. We picked Libya because Libya was the most convenient target. So states are not really needed for this. Any network, any cell of people.
Freelancers.
Exactly, I mean freelancers with some retailers of terror who have some money could do this. You don't really need a state to be behind this.
Their home is as much in the Sudan as it is in Dallas, Texas, and that's the problem today. In fact, it probably isn't more in Dallas because there's a large Hamas concentration in Dallas than it is perhaps in parts of the Middle East. That's the ultimate irony. Located here in the heart of the great Satan gives them the best opportunity to carry out these types of attacks.
Frightening stuff. CBS News consultants Steve Emerson and Fuad Ajami, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
We'll have more news in a moment. This is CBS News Up to the Minute. Winter weather moved back into parts of Colorado yesterday, leaving plenty of snow behind. The spring storm blanketed areas of the Rocky Mountain state with upwards of 20 inches of fresh powder. Snowplows and motorists on one interstate dealt with the situation rather well. But if you have to deal with it on a regular basis, it's probably not that bad. At the very least, the fresh flakes made for some picturesque scenery. Now let's check out today's weather. A storm moving through the west will bring mountain snow and showers to parts of the west. Some snowflakes will fall across the central plains. New England will get a chance to dry out a bit. Temperatures in parts of the northwest and the Rockies will be in the 40s and 50s. In contrast, warm weather will dominate in the south, with temperatures getting into the 70s and maybe the 80s.
Young America took a 1-point lead over Mighty Mary and Stars and Stripes in the America's Cup Defender Finals with 5 races remaining. Susie Leach-Nairn took a water break as Mighty Mary took on Young America after a day off due to high seas. Winds were tricky and the waves were still 7 to 11 feet yesterday. Shifting winds caused sail changes, sharp turns, and probably made Dramamine a popular item. Young America increased its lead at each mark and won by 2 minutes 46 seconds to reach 4 points in the Defender Finals.
You're back with CBS News Up to the Minute. This is Thursday, April 20th.
It was on this date in 1978 that a Korean Airlines jet was shot down after straying into Soviet airspace. An international effort for the release of the passengers followed. CBS News correspondent Bob McNamara had this report.
The American Mercy flight arrived in Helsinki just before dawn, and 106 people greeted the end to the ordeal that spanned 3 days and included the crash landing of their South Korean airliner and the killing of 2 passengers during a mid-air attack by a Soviet warplane. This was one of 2 infants among the weary men, women, and children, most of them South Koreans and Japanese. 2 adults were evacuated to a Helsinki hospital on stretchers, suffering, along with nearly a dozen others, from shrapnel wounds, cuts, and fractures, the injuries sustained during the jet fighter's assault. The caskets of the 2 dead, a Korean man and a Japanese man, mark the deeper tragedy of this still largely mysterious international incident, one that took the diplomatic efforts of 5 nations to secure the release of the passengers and all but 2 of the Korean crew. Missing from the returning Korean Airlines crew were the pilot and navigator of the ill-fated jet. The 2 were being held indefinitely at an undisclosed location in the Soviet Union, detained for questioning about violating Russian airspace. Like South Korean airline officials, passengers could not explain why the plane had strayed 1,000 miles off course. In fact, many thought they had been flying over North America.
When we landed, we thought we were in Alaska.
You thought you were in Alaska?
Yes, because we had been flying nearly 8 hours, and so we thought we were going to land to Anchorage.
Later today, most of the passengers and crew headed for Korea and Japan. But as they prepared to fly over the pole again, nagging questions were still lacking answers, such as how could a veteran navigator and pilot become lost on a route they'd flown many times? And why did a Soviet fighter pilot fire on a helpless airliner? Bob McNamara, CBS News, Helsinki.
Several days later, the Soviets released the pilot and navigator, claiming the two had admitted violating Soviet airspace and refusing to obey Soviet orders to land.
On April 20th, 1979, the city of Rome was rattled by a bomb. The explosion did extensive damage to the Michelangelo's historic Palace of the Senators. No one was injured. The neo-fascist group claimed responsibility for the blast. At the time, the building was being used as Rome's City Hall.
And that's our news then and now.
Thanks for joining us. This is CBS News Up to the Minute.
Terror in the heartland. The search for victims continues as investigators look for suspects. Connie Chung reports live from Oklahoma City tonight on the CBS Evening News. This is CBS.
Rescuers in Oklahoma City sifted through rubble all night long, searching and hoping to reach victims still alive in the aftermath of one of the worst acts of terrorism in the nation's history. Good morning from CBS News in New York. This is Up to the Minute. I'm Ed Crane.
And I'm Nanette Hansen. Thanks for being with us. Here's what's happening. Oklahoma City this morning is still shaking from the deadliest U.S. bombing in 75 years. A car bomb yesterday ripped a 9-story hole in a federal office building at the beginning of the workday. The casualties are staggering. At least 31 people are dead, among them 12 children, some of whom were in a daycare center in the building. At least 200 people are injured and another 300 are missing. And the hunt is on this morning for the suspects. The FBI has advised border checkpoints in Texas to be on the lookout for 2 people who may be bloodied and may be trying to cross into Mexico. As for the car bomb, Oklahoma police now believe it was in a minivan with Texas license plates. Police say the minivan was owned by National Car Rental.
And the federal building was not the bomber's only target. The time and place for this attack also appeared to be designed to inflict maximum terror and human casualties. Bob McNamara has the story of the people in harm's way.
The impact of the blast that hit the heartland toppled walls and windows, shattering lives and American illusions.
Seemed like the whole world ended. Back up!
While police pushed people back, fearing another explosion,
They found another bomb.
crowds pushed closer in disbelief.
You see this kind of stuff on TV, not in your backyard.
For this city, with a history of handling the toughest of times, hardest to take was the knowledge that all this was intentional.
It's too close to home.
The work of someone bent on bloodshed. Here it was what happened to the children in the federal building's daycare center that hurt most deeply.
Every day of the week she's there except Wednesdays. I kept her at home today, so she was at home with me.
For Eric and Corey Langer, this was a day to count blessings.
We're very fortunate, but there's a lot of other parents that aren't right now.
If you're all positive in that line.
When the city's emergency services called for blood donors, hundreds lined up to help.
I think people care, about their fellow man. I think there's a lot of caring people out here.
Here too, a new knowledge that there are people who don't care, who want to cause this kind of pain.
Does it make you feel vulnerable? I felt that way for quite a while. Haven't you?
Gone in a few seconds, but gone forever, is the Middle American sense of security, replaced with the sinking feeling that suddenly no place is safe. Bob McNamara, CBS News, Oklahoma City.
Senator Richard Lugar of Indiana has made it official. Yesterday, he became the latest Republican to seek the GOP presidential nomination. To stand out from the rest of the pack, he is stressing his foreign policy experience. He's also pitching a somewhat radical idea.
In addition to balancing the budget, however, I favor
abolishing the federal income tax and all of the Internal Revenue Service.
Lugar admits he's a long shot. He becomes the 8th Republican to join the race for the party's presidential nomination.
Actor Carroll O'Connor went to court to watch the arraignment of the man charged with providing cocaine to his son, who committed suicide last month. O'Connor and his wife were hoping 39-year-old Harry Perzigian would not be released on bail. He was arrested the day after O'Connor's son Hugh committed suicide. Perzigian pleaded innocent to charges of possession of cocaine for sale and was released on bail, and that angered O'Connor.
If you're pushing dope, you're pushing a lot of other stuff. You're a sleazeball, and you're a felon, and you're a felon on more than one count.
The judge only raised Perzigian's bail another $5,000. O'Connor dared Perzigian to sue him for his comments.
Well, we might get to hear what was said between Judge Lancito and the jurors in transcripts released today. The judge conducted unusual private interviews with jurors yesterday amid reports of racial tensions from a dismissed juror. We are also hearing more about Cato Kalin and the trouble he might be in because of a book deal. Harvey Levin has more from Los Angeles.
I will not lie.
Cato Kalin swore he wouldn't, but attorney Leonard Marks believes Kalin has been caught in many lies, caught on tape. Marks represents author Mark Elliott, who recorded 15 hours of conversation with Kalin as background for an already completed manuscript on the relationship between O.J. and Nicole Simpson. Item: Kalin testified the day of the murders. After the dance recital, O.J. Simpson rather nonchalantly commented about Nicole's dress.
I don't know, Cato. I don't know how they can wear these tight outfits. If they're going to be grandmas one day, I mean, can they wear those?
But in a satellite interview, Marks told me Kalin withheld some telling information.
O.J. told him that one of the things he was concerned about is that she was going to go to a club that night. That hasn't been revealed in the testimony.
The idea that Nicole may be going clubbing suggests the idea that she's going to be with other men. If she is going to be with other men, that may provide a motive, and the motive being jealousy.
Item: Though Kalin testified O.J. and Nicole Simpson shared many good times, Mark says the tapes put Kalin on record with a very different story.
She would say things like that he's got arthritis and she doesn't want to be with him because when he gets older, and he's so much older than she is, that he's going to be in a wheelchair, and she's not interested in being with him, you know, when he's in a wheelchair, and what's going to happen in terms of their sex life at that time and so on. I mean, there was a lot of painful misery in this relationship, and Cato is aware of all these details, none of which he's testified about.
Did Kalin ever say that he saw physical violence between Nicole and O.J. Simpson?
He said that Nicole had told him many times about being beaten by O.J. Simpson.
Item: Kalin testified O.J. Simpson was moving on with his life.
Did he ever show any anger or upset, or being upset at the fact that she was dating other men?
No.
There is a lot of information that he has about O.J.'s continuing inquiries about who Nicole was dating, his anger and fury about who she was dating.
Have prosecutors indicated they will recall him to you?
Yes. I think that, frankly, it's very sad and miserable, but this is quite devastating evidence.
Mark says before the murders, O.J. Simpson repeatedly told Kalin he was, quote, lonely and bored and really unhappy. And Mark says Kalin had conversations with Simpson the day before, the day of, and the day after the murders that Mark says will go a long way in explaining the events at Bundy. In Los Angeles, Harvey Levin for CBS News.
Stay with us. The news continues.
This is CBS News Up to the Minute.
In there, and then it seemed like the whole world ended. I mean, the ceilings and window glass come out. Boy, it's just deafening, the sound of it. I mean, it was bad news.
Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, the heartland of America. People choose life here. The streets are cleaner, and life is basically easier than it is in the big city. It's far away from scandals and massacres and terrorism. The 1995 almanac says Oklahoma City, Oklahoma is 105 years old, just more than 600 square miles, and home to 444,724 people. Of those 400,000 plus people, more than 3/4 are white, and 71,000 plus are black. Per capita income, it's around $17,600. The city itself was incorporated in 1890 and became the state capital 20 years later. All in all, a slice of Americana, in a place most people never suspected would be the target of a possible terrorist attack.
Yesterday began in Oklahoma City like any other day in any other American city or town. Thousands of people heading off to work. No reason to expect they were in danger. Now perhaps there is no reason to be absolutely sure any of us is safe. CBS News correspondent Richard Threlkeld reports on Americans living on the edge.
Time was when Americans could grieve from afar over something like this, the death of 237 U.S. Marines in a terrorist bombing in Beirut in 1983. It always happened somewhere else. We were sympathetic spectators when someone let loose some nerve gas on the Tokyo subway system last month, killing 11 and injuring thousands. But that was over there. Now it's over here.
We are blamed for the world's ills. We are blamed for not being able to solve the world's ills. So, in fact, yes, the United States will continue to be a principal target of terrorists in the future.
You know, Oklahoma City, of all places, why would they pick that? You know, just to instill terror, to let everybody know that they can strike anywhere.
If it's political and religious zealots involved, it's almost as if they don't care what price they have to pay. They just want to lash out at the United States.
And the victims are almost always the innocent. Children at a daycare center in Oklahoma City. Frightened, trapped children in the terrorist bomb blast at the World Trade Center in New York City 2 years ago.
I'm in and out of those public buildings all the time, and it's frightening.
The United States really is an open country. The cities are open. The borders are open. We're so vulnerable to someone who really wants to do damage to the country that it's frightening.
Because it can happen at any time, any place.
We're very vulnerable.
This is the United States of violence, I guess.
Look at us. We're still animals. I mean, animals don't even act like this, you know?
It was bad enough when all this horror happened somewhere else. But now that the world's become a global village, there is no somewhere else anymore. Look out, America. Terrorism's come home. Richard Threlkeld, CBS News, New York.
In terms of terrorism, the attack in Oklahoma City is perhaps the sum of all fears. The strike to America's heartland is a strike to the heart. If it can happen there, a terrorist attack can happen anywhere. In Washington is Mayor Nudell, a former counterterrorism expert with the State Department, now a consultant in Falls Church, Virginia. Mr. Nudell, why Oklahoma City?
Well, at this point, there's really no way of knowing for sure. It could be, as you suggested, a way of sending a message that these people feel they have the capability to strike us anywhere at any time. It could also be something as relatively simple as the fact that after surveying various possibilities, they came to the conclusion that that was the best place for them.
What do you suppose is the psychological impact of hitting America in its so-called heartland? Normally we expect things like this to happen in the big cities, in Washington perhaps, at the nation's airports. What's the impact of this hitting here?
Well, if you're talking about the impact on the average American, I think many people will find it to be somewhat of a body blow. As you suggest, when people think about terrorist attacks in the United States, they commonly think of airports, they commonly think of places like New York City. They don't think of places like Oklahoma. And while it's always been a possibility that these sorts of things could occur anywhere, most people won't have thought of that. On the other hand, if you're thinking about the psychological effect to people looking at it from outside the United States, perhaps people who are in sympathy with those that we ultimately find to have been the perpetrators of this will find that they feel that they've scored a major success.
Okay, what about countermeasures? The fundamentalists have launched a jihad. How does the U.S. respond or retaliate with equal force? I guess first we have to identify who's responsible.
Clearly, we have to identify who's responsible to determine whether or not there is any real target that we can retaliate against. Our first priority, of course, is going to be to identify the people who actually committed this so that we can bring them to justice.
You know, and we're talking about psychological impact of this particular incident, this tragedy happening in Oklahoma City. There's also a certain amount of outrage for every American, whether they're in Oklahoma City or, you know, New York City.
Oh, certainly. An incident like this demonstrates a couple of things. Most significantly, the fact that the people who perpetrate the offense are very callous and have a complete disregard and lack of interest in human life, regardless of their purported reasons for doing it. On the other hand, those of us who have to somewhat helplessly look on and think about the aftermath feel helpless to have prevented it and feel as though it may have happened directly to us.
As we mentioned earlier, you are a former counterterrorism expert. You worked with the State Department. How difficult is it to pinpoint who's responsible for this attack?
It can be very difficult. We saw in the World Trade Center, though, that with good law enforcement techniques and investigative capabilities and forensic scientific approaches, that we were indeed able to identify the people who perpetrated it and ultimately to bring them to justice. Hopefully the same result we'll obtain in this case.
What about measures we can take, the average American, to protect ourselves or simply to feel safe?
Well, there are limits, of course, to what we as individuals can do. We have to rely on law enforcement and other authorities whose job it is to give us our basic umbrella of protection. But as individuals, we can contribute to this umbrella of protection by making it a point to become aware of our surroundings and what's normal within our environment so that we become immediately aware of things that are unusual because they stand out. We can then help the authorities by bringing this to their attention so that they have the opportunity to prevent things from happening or to respond to them and thereby mitigate the damage that might be done.
President Reagan responded to terrorism in kind when he ordered the bombing of Libya in 1986. Did that work? And if we can identify who's responsible, should we do it again?
Well, those types of actions are very difficult and rare in terms of being able to carry them out because very often we can't ultimately identify a governmental target like Libya in that case where we have an option to strike back. In the case of Libya, it did have some utility. Since that attack, Gaddafi himself has been somewhat less active in committing acts of terrorism or sponsoring them, especially against American targets. However, the example that set hasn't done anything to deter countries like Iran, Syria, and other countries that still use terrorism for their own ends.
Mr. Nudell, before we let you go, what strikes you professionally and personally most about this attack in Oklahoma City?
Well, I'm struck a bit by the fact that it in many ways parallels the attack on the World Trade Center. It's not an identical replication of it, but what it does suggest to me is that there are people who watched what happened with the World Trade Center and despite our ability to bring those perpetrators to justice, felt that they could accomplish the same thing and probably thought that they wouldn't make the types of mistakes that caused the World Trade Center people to be brought to justice.
Mayor Nudell joining us from Washington. Thank you.